I was muted. Sorry, I'm recording it.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. So we'll just jump right into it then. So we're just going to be going over some general ads, web page stuff, and just general compliance. So to get background around what I do specifically, what NCG does, there's a few things that we do. There's web accessibility with ADA compliance. We'll touch on some of that today. Monitor and remediate bad advertising. Regulatory brand compliance, just general consulting and auditing. So essentially what I try to tell people, if I just had one sentence to say what it is that NCG does, if it can get you in trouble, we try to help you fix it. And there's the website, and that's me, Jennifer Flood. So like I said, when we just started in the lobby a minute ago, the things that we're going to touch on today are just these 4 things. I know gainful employment isn't a thing, I'll say a thing anymore, but we have the exact same administration essentially coming into office in January that we had when gainful employment was enacted. So I think we're going to have a revisit of that, especially with, DeVos was such a kind of a polarizing figure in the US. So I expect to see some of that back, but we'll touch on that here in a minute. TCPA, we could probably do a full day just on TCPA and some of the issues that we have with them. But some of the things that most of the time for marketing, what people need to know is that you need to have consent. There has to be the language at the bottom of forms, there always has to. There's always question about, whether you're using automatic dialers or if you're texting, that sort of thing. For the most part, it's hard to say that you're not using the robo dialing, because it isn't always necessarily the the complicated systems. It's the way the law is written. If a number can be stored and automatically called, it's considered a quote unquote robocall. So better safe than sorry is to always have the consent. And some of the class actions that have been affected by it are obviously retailers, debt collectors. A gigantic amount of those are telemarketers. And so schools get sued by way of telemarketers because most of the call centers are considered that. And it doesn't seem like a lot, right? So it's just $500 per phone call or $1,500 for text message. It doesn't seem like a lot of money. The problem is that you're doing these in such mass amounts, depending on the size of the school, of course. It doesn't seem like a lot. But if we look at a couple of schools, $3.5 million is a lot for any size school, really. And let's see. I always try to keep school names out of these, but these are some of the larger universities that you see, like Bridgepoint is gigantic, Ashford's large, University of Rockies, these are all large, but they all use telemarketing, and they do use a lot of auto dialers. But these are the ones that make the news, and I think that's important to know. If you have something like University of Rockies, they're going to make the news everywhere. But necessarily some of the smaller schools won't make news because nobody knows really who they are on a nationwide basis. So it's not that they're not having settlements or not being sued for these things. They're just not in everyone else's face the way these larger schools are. So essentially the takeaway from TCPA, even though we could go in depth for that stuff forever in a day, that you might be working with a call center, and if that company disregards TCPA, you have to pay the price for it. There's nothing that you could put in your agreements that's going to sign away any of your rights or responsibilities to be TCPA compliant. Your telemarketer is going to get in trouble, obviously, because of their practices, but also the school will. And nobody's going to put in, the Huffington Post or any other media outlet. No one's going to put in XYZ call center got in trouble for something. That's not what gets clicks. That's not what gets attention. They're going to say, ABC school, because that's where all of the students who experience TCPA violations, they have no idea that it's a telemarketing company calling them. They think it's just people who work at the school. And You know, the way we think about processes is somebody will dial in from a call center, they'll get transferred, you know, sometimes up to 4 times if you've ever done some test leads on your schools. And they're transferred so often that they're just thinking, oh, well, they're talking to a different department or a different person. And really, these are just hot transfers being sent all over the place. I mean, we all kind of know how vendors work in the school space. So the problem is the student is going to say, the school called me 47 times, or I had robocalls, you know, how I've seen 23 a day or in some of our test leads, which is just unbelievable. But there's no disconnect from a consumer point of view between a telemarketer and the actual school themselves. So keep that stuff in mind, where it's not necessarily you doing it, but you are absolutely going to get in trouble for a vendor's bad actions. So to touch on gainful employment, they haven't, as of right now, and I don't know, I haven't looked this morning. If anyone else knows more than I do at this very second, please butt in and tell me. But as of right now, Biden hasn't selected anyone to be the Secretary of Education. So we know that Betsy DeVos is on her way out, but we have absolutely no idea who's coming in. The 3 names that I've seen are these 3 that I have listed. There's Lily Garcia and Sean Spiller, who are both they're both I'm losing the word. They're with the unions, education unions. And generally those aren't necessarily student focused. I suppose that depends on which aisle of things that you're on, but generally, if you're working for an education association, you're more about, you know, the employees. And a lot of times, very often, it's public school centered. Which, you know, far and wide, most of our education system from Secretary of Education's point of view does work on this stuff. But we had massive upsetting of status quo when Obama was in office. I mean, we had to completely redraw how we were marketing to students because of that administration. And we have that same administration back in office again. So I would wager to assume that he's going to put somebody in much like he did before. And there's going to be some heavy-handed changes to for-profits, especially, and maybe I have this on the next, let's see if I do, that they were tough on higher education. Gainful employment was put in by Obama Biden in, was it 2011, I believe. And we had huge schools be punished and go bankrupt during that time. And we had ITT, DeVry. I mean, you guys know about the toppling of these gigantic schools. They made news for years when this stuff happened. And then I would imagine, I don't know, obviously I haven't seen anything about it, but if you put the same people back in office that were in before with the same sorts of principles that they had before, you're probably going to get some of the same outcomes. So I assume, and especially with the forgiving student loans, you know, Biden hasn't done it, but he's been asked by a lot of people to do so. Even if they don't wipe the slate clean for everyone, they're going to be looking for someone to blame for that. And it's so easy to throw for-profits under the bus, even though I would wager to guess, you know, people with PhDs, master's degrees, et cetera, for some of our traditional schools have gigantic student loan debts, but it's much easier to punish, you know, someone like an ITT Tech who has a wider range of people taking out loans with low graduation rates. And the problem is some of the schools, like I'm in Kansas, for example. So you think about KU, they probably have similar graduation rates or even worse than some of the for-profits, but because of you know, the bad press that for-profits have gotten, it's easy, especially for Democratic administrations, to really hand it to them, which is I think it's going to be rough next year. And if I remember correctly, Obama's friend, who was the White House doctor, somebody please tell me if I'm wrong, and I'm going to Google this afterwards and correct myself if I'm wrong, but I believe he sold or had transferred University of Phoenix to him. So that, I mean, that's a gigantic school system that was disrupted by, administration doing things like closing down ITT, et cetera, and then shifting ownership over to like personal friends of other gigantic schools. So I think Biden was sort of worst case scenario for for-profits. So we'll have to see what happens. And I'll do some looking again this week to see if there's any sort of, rumors about who might be appointed to Secretary of Education. One thing I did want to make sure we had plenty of time to talk about is a thing that, we've had just loads of issues dealing with lately. And maybe some of you have too, and I'm happy to answer any questions about them because we're sort of in the midst of building a gigantic database of this stuff and dealing with it on a daily basis. But they're non-branded Facebook ads. So you'll see an ad like the one on the screen where it'll say something like nursing programs no longer require 4 years and thousands of dollars of tuition. There are these clickbaity sort of videos, and they're just completely ridiculous ads that are connected to not school pages directly, they're connected to vendor pages. So, the vendor will, their entire purpose is just get click-throughs, get leads filled out. And so I can understand that from, I suppose, from a marketing point of view. If what they're doing is getting clicks and engagement and getting leads filled out, that person who built this ad says to themselves, well, I did the right thing. And rarely do they have some sort of internal legal who's overviewing. And I know that just from working in a lot of marketing companies. They don't have sort of a checkpoint of, yes, compliance looked at this and they said it was fine. This ad is completely non-compliant because it does cost thousands of dollars to be a nurse. It does take time. There are no disclosures on it. It's just a junk ad. And then, we have the interstitial pages after that, which aren't compliant either. Half the time, way more than half the time, there's no privacy policy. There's no TCPA. There's no data protections whatsoever as far as, how they're selling the data. So all of the leads that you're getting off of ads like this are illegal, essentially. Essentially, you can't market to them at all. And the problem is you rarely know that you're getting them because, and maybe somebody will know the statistic better than me, but from what I hear from most vendors is when you're buying online leads, what I think 1 or 2% are valid leads, or not valid. Somebody might have to tell me the word I'm looking for. They convert, 1 or 2% convert for online leads. So they're sending lots of junk, I guess is what I'm saying. Here's another one. I had a client call me, I don't know, I think this had to have been a couple months ago. He said, we've had a couple of people call us and ask about the free degrees that we're giving out for people over 65 or, for senior citizens, that sort of thing. I was like, I've never heard of such a thing. And they obviously weren't offering it. They weren't offering discounts. There was nothing that they could attach that to. And so when students come across something like this ad that, seniors are picking, their favorite online degrees, and they're just ridiculous. And, saying that they're cheap degrees, this clicked through 3 clicks and it was to a major university in the United States. And there was no connection to it whatsoever. So the student experience is they click on this and then answer one question, answer a second question, and they're on a school page. Well, the school hasn't done any sort of backward search to know that they're being connected to these. So the student thinks, oh, well, ABC University approved this ad. And so they're calling them, they get to the web page or they get online or on a call with an admissions rep and they say, well, the ad that I saw said that, there's a discount for us and I'd like to know what that discount is. So, or whatever the claim is on these ads. That's a lot of the issue they had no idea, this particular university had no idea this ad was out there, this and many of them like them. And so they have no idea how to address it on a call with a potential student. That's really what a lot of the issue is. And so we had to go through and find what we thought the student was talking about, and then try to find the vendor to put a stop to it, send cease and desist, that sort of thing. And I believe here's a couple more examples of that, of just things that, I mean, these are completely non-compliant. They're offering scholarships that they have no valid reason to know whether they're being offered or not. None of the claims in the ad on the right are actually legitimate. And these click through, I think it took 2 to 3 clicks to get to a school landing page. So they're really close, right? And nobody knows this. If you look at the top left there, whatever Facebook page, there's no association with a company for that. But if you're clicking through and 2 clicks through, you get to a major school, that's the only connection that person has to it. So they're going to be calling your admissions people, complaining about an ad or trying to get the benefit from whatever ad that they saw. So why are they difficult? And this has been something that we've had to deal with on a daily basis. And it takes an enormous amount of just, it feels like pushing a gigantic boulder up a hill. Because Facebook doesn't index their ads, Google doesn't index them. So any company that says, oh, well, we do search and remediation, so we search for these and we find them, they don't. It's just not possible. Facebook doesn't allow search of these kinds of ads. So what you have to do is you have to find what you think a person might advertise, which is kind of common sense, right? You're going to look for free online degrees or cheap degrees or whatever. And you have to physically search that stuff inside of social media and then determine whether that page is running ads, and then look to see what those ads are to see if they're compliant. I mean, it's quite the process. And the problem is the people who probably should be looking for these for you likely aren't, because it's an enormous amount of work. The amount of work we put in to get those done is crazy. But we're working on a database to try to figure out at least the manner in which they're doing them, so that we can find all the landing pages they're using and then go backwards to see if we can see how they're connected. You can see one of the major issues is they can change the page daily. I can get off this call and start a Facebook page that's Get Cheap Degrees in America, and that's the page name. And I can start collecting leads and firing them off to anyone. So if you'll take a look here, these are actual pages that we have the actual links for that are in our vendor database. So Campus Explorer, yes, they have a Facebook page that says Campus Explorer that you can go to. And they have absolutely no ads that Campus Explorer Facebook page is running. Quinn Street's exactly the same way. And most of them are. Most of the well-known vendors, you know, that you see on a daily basis aren't running ads on those pages. They'll own things like medical assisting classes, and that'll be a page that, you know, 2,000 people follow. Degree Search Center. There are things that you've just generally never heard of on their own, but a lot of people would like as a page on Facebook. Best nursing programs. There's best master's degree programs. I mean, there's 150 of those that are just best something programs, but they're all owned by Campus Explorer. Those 3 in particular. So what we've done is built this huge database of, okay, we know that these 100 pages or whatever are owned by Campus Explorer, so that we can keep tying them back in. So if we see an ad that says offering scholarships to the school or giving away $6,500 for the first 25 people who, you know, come into our nursing program, we know to call Campus Explorer's compliance department and say, hey, you need to shut these ads down, because 95% of the time they've never seen them either. So that's sort of the process of how you have to find these and get rid of them. For example, All-Star Directories has, those are some of their pages. But like I said, once we find a page and we show them the ad, we'll send them the ad and say, hey, you need to shut these down. Generally, that'll happen the same day. They'll shut the page down, or they'll shut all the ads off. And all they'll do is move over, and then they'll start a page called Modern Nursing Degree USA. And then they'll run ads on that. And we can't find it unless we physically go out and look for those ads again, or we do the back search from, you know, backlinks to another page that we know is connected to an interstitial page. Hopefully that makes some kind of sense. You know, I mean, we deal with it every day, so I'm sure that it's kind of a convoluted process if it's not something that you do a lot. But if it's something that you have a department at the school or whatever that's monitoring affiliates, they've got to build kind of a backwards database to deal with these people, because really you're dealing with a few vendors, but you're trying to figure out where the 700 pages that they're collecting data all live, so that you're not you know, trying to weed through them just to get something taken down. Send test leads. And often you aren't going to know if these leads are coming to you unless you send the test leads. So you have to follow the pages through. If you see an ad on Facebook and you're like, oh, they're giving away, you know, there's some nurse, you know, jumping around trying to get your attention in a video, and it looks like clickbait, fill it out. It'll irritate you for a few days because you'll get 1,000 phone calls from telemarketers. But I'm telling you, you have to get the experience, because if when you get the experience of going through what some of the students go through, you'll likely change some of the processes for what you do, because it's going to get people into trouble if there's constant just telemarketer abuse and no one does anything to stop any of it. So fill out the forms, you know, get the same experience that they do, because vendors are selling data everywhere. They're selling them to payday loan companies, to debt consolidators, to schools, and it's the same kind of information. You know, we work with people who aren't just necessarily schools, and you know, they'll send home refinance leads over to debt collection agencies, and vice versa. They just pool all of the data, repackage it, and then sell it in bulk to other people. So the students get bombarded with just junk when all they're looking for is a CNA class or whatever that might be being offered for that particular school. So I do encourage that, and then let your vendors know that it's just intolerable. I think that's another step that people don't do, is it's okay to tell a vendor that what they're doing is not okay. ADA, a gigantic problem that we'll cover in less than 5 minutes. Web accessibility is about how people can actually use your website. A lot of times people think, well, everybody can use the internet, and if you can't, what's the problem? The problem is, just like you go to the grocery store, if you go to the grocery store this afternoon, they have handicap stalls there for people to pull in. The same handicap stall rules apply to the internet, and all of our websites have to comply with those things. In the United States, and I think most of the people on the call are from the United States, but the same principles are whether you're in Canada or the United States, actually, but we have the Americans with Disabilities Act here. And all of the businesses in the United States, this is not school specific, it's every business in the United States has to be held accountable to the ADA. And if someone suffers discrimination based on what a business does, that person who is discriminated against can sue that business. And we've seen an explosion in lawsuits for this. You know, the reason that I got started helping schools is where I started doing this, was because we had a school get sued. Somebody couldn't consume one of the videos that was on the school's website. And so we got a demand letter out of the blue and had no idea why we were in violation, what happened, what the issues were. So that was it was a learning curve that was painful. But you know, the process to get things fixed now is much better. So it's something that people need to put on their radars. It doesn't matter if you're, you know, if you have a small pizza joint or if you have a gigantic $1 billion school. You have to, everybody in between has to be ADA compliant. And those things are the rules on how to become ADA compliant are. Is Susie telling me I have 100 seconds to get out of this?
It's not me, it's Jody.
Oh, sorry. I just looked at your picture and thought the same thing. So I have 90 seconds to finish this. Do I have any questions, or do you want to ask questions, or do you just want me to blaze through these? I will just keep going. And then you can email me questions, or if we can, it doesn't matter. You can get a hold of me any way you can. The rules.
I'll make sure they have your information.
Awesome. But the rules, if people want to know the rules and figure out how to have a developer work on this internally, these are the rules. There's a link in this presentation on the rules to go by in order to get things updated. So if you're asking yourself, if you're sitting there saying, well, does that apply to us? Yes, it applies to every business everywhere. And this is not to scare you. These are just facts. I would say schools aren't the #1 most sued, but they're definitely, you know, in a top 10. #1 is retail, like, right? People are going to go to websites that they're using to buy things far more often than they're coming to a school's website to sign up for information. I mean, it's just, you have to fish where the fish are for a lot of plaintiffs. So that's why there's a massive rise in them, because we're also all at home. We're all using websites we might not have used before. And so people are also coming across difficulties they haven't had before. So there's a lot to keep in mind with that stuff. There are benefits. Not everything is just the worst thing you can imagine for ADA accessibility. Google favors sites that are ADA accessible, so that's awesome. Building positive